What's this smell? Get out. Immediately.
I regited, sir.
You crawled out of a sewer. You're stinking up my classroom.
Grabbed Byron's hand, dropped it, wiped each finger with a tissue,
I can play, sir.
turned to the class.
Did everyone hear that?
Laughter.
Go home, boy. You leave. I said you don't belong here.
Byron didn't move.
No, sir. I can play.
The laughter stopped. Whitfield's face turned pale,
Humiliating.
seized Byron's collar, dragged him to the Steinway,
Show
slammed
us.
him onto the bench, hit record.
Show us. You'll be our laughingstock.
Byron placed his fingers on the keys. What happened next? Not yet. First, you need to know who Byron Palmer really is. South Philadelphia doesn't let you forget where you are. The row houses lean into each other like tired men waiting for a bus. Brick walls stained brown from decades of rain. Fire escapes rusted halfway to orange. The smell of fried onions drifts from a corner shop at 6 in the morning, mixing with exhaust from delivery trucks that rattle down narrow streets before sunrise. This is where Byron Palmer grew up. This is where he still lives. 3rd floor, end of the hall, apartment 3F. The door sticks when it rains. The hallway light has been out for 2 months. But inside, the floors are swept clean. The curtains are white, washed every Sunday. A small kitchen table covered with a plastic cloth, 2 chairs, a Bible, and a bottle of pills. That bottle belongs to Loretta Palmer, Byron's grandmother, 71 years old, chronic lung disease, the kind that doesn't go away, only gets managed. She breathes through a nebulizer twice a day and sees a specialist once a month. Every visit costs money. Every refill costs money. Everything costs money. Byron pays for most of it. He's 18. Just graduated from high school 3 weeks ago. No ceremony, no party. He picked up his diploma from the front office on a Tuesday and went straight to his shift at Dave's Grocery on Passyunk Avenue. 5 a.m. starts. Unloading pallets, stacking shelves, hauling crates to the back. His hands are rough from it, calloused across the palms, scarred on 2 knuckles from a box cutter that slipped last December. But those hands are long. The fingers are thin and stretch wide. A piano teacher would look at them and say, "Those are built for the keys." No piano teacher ever looked at them. After the grocery shift, Byron showers, changes, and walks 11 blocks to his second job. Evening register at a convenience store on Snyder Avenue. He stands behind the counter from 4 to midnight, selling cigarettes and lottery tickets to people who don't look at his face. He doesn't complain. He doesn't talk much. His coworkers call him Ghost because he moves through a room without making a sound. Head slightly down, eyes watching everything. The kind of quiet that people mistake for empty, but isn't. Because every night, after his shift, Byron walks home, locks the door, and sits down at the piano in the corner of the living room. It's an old upright, a Wurlitzer from the 1970s. The cabinet is scratched, the finish peeling along the edges. 3 of the keys have yellowed past ivory into something closer to bone. The sustain pedal sticks if you press it too hard. But Byron wipes it down every morning before he leaves. He covers it with a cloth his grandmother made. And he plays it every single night, quietly enough not to wake Loretta, loudly enough to feel it in his chest. He's been doing this for 8 years. His mother taught him. Vivian Palmer had long fingers too. She could stretch a 10th on the keyboard, thumb to pinky, 10 white keys apart, without straining. She played at a community college recital once when she was 22, and the professor told her she had the most natural left hand he'd seen in 15 years of teaching. She applied to the Curtis Institute of Music that same year. Full scholarship application. She spent 3 months preparing her audition piece. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. and took 2 buses and a train to the audition. She was rejected. The letter didn't say why. It never does. But Vivian suspected it had something to do with how the panel looked at her when she walked in. The way one of them glanced at her shoes. She never applied again. She never talked about it with bitterness. She just came home, sat down at the Wurlitzer, and played. And then she taught Byron. Every evening, after dinner, she'd pull him onto the bench beside her. His feet didn't reach the pedals. His fingers could barely cover 5 keys. But she placed her hands over his and showed him how to feel the weight of each note. Not just press, but lean into it. Music doesn't care where you come from, baby. It only cares that you show up. She said that so many times that Byron stopped hearing it as words. It became a sound, a hum in the background of his childhood. The way the apartment smelled like her lotion and warm wood and dust inside the piano. Vivian got sick when Byron was 9. Pneumonia first, then something worse. The doctors used words Byron didn't understand. Loretta understood them, though. She started praying louder. Vivian died on a Wednesday in March. Byron was 10. He didn't play the piano for 4 months after that. Then one night he couldn't sleep. He walked to the living room, sat down, put his hands on the keys, and played. He's played every night since. 8 years. No teacher, no lessons. YouTube videos paused and replayed hundreds of times. Theory books borrowed from the public library, returned, borrowed again, and a small notebook, his mother's notebook, filled with handwritten music. Melodies she composed. Chord progressions she experimented with. Notes in the margins, softer here, breathe, let it ring. Byron carries that notebook in his backpack. Every day. Everywhere. He found the flyer on a Tuesday afternoon. Taped to the bulletin board at the public library, between a lost cat poster and a GED tutoring ad. Glossy paper, black and gold lettering. Whitfield Summer Intensive. 3 weeks of advanced musical training. Scholarships to partnering conservatories available for exceptional participants. Tuition? $2,800. Byron stood in front of that flyer for 4 minutes without moving. $2,800. That was exactly what he had saved over the past 14 months. Every dollar left after rent, after groceries, after Loretta's prescriptions. He kept it in a shoebox under his bed, counted every Sunday. If he spent it and failed, Loretta would miss 2 months of medication refills. He didn't tell her. He folded the flyer into his back pocket and went to work. But Loretta found it. She found it in his jeans when she did laundry, because grandmothers find everything. She was sitting at the kitchen table when he came home. The flyer was smoothed flat in front of her. She looked up at him over her reading glasses. "How long you been carrying this around?" "A few days." "And you weren't going to tell me?" "It's too much money, Grandma." Loretta took off her glasses, set them on the table, looked at him the way she looked at him when he was lying, which was the same way she always looked at him. "Your mama didn't leave that piano so it could collect dust. Go." Byron registered the next morning. Paid in cash, $2,800 in 20s and 10s, counted out at a folding table. The woman looked at the bills, then at him, then at the bills again. He walked out with a confirmation slip and nothing in the shoebox. Stay with this story. You'll want to see what happens when Byron walks into that room. Gerald Whitfield walked like a man who owned every room he entered. 56 years old. Silver hair swept back without a strand out of place. A gray linen vest over a pressed white shirt, pocket square folded into a perfect triangle. His shoes were Italian, the kind that click against hardwood floors and make people look up when he approaches. He had studied at Juilliard. performed twice at Carnegie Hall before he turned 30. Critics called him technically impeccable, but the solo career never reached the heights he had mapped out for himself. The invitations slowed. The reviews grew polite instead of passionate. That politeness, the quiet way the world tells you that you're no longer needed, settled into him like rust. By 40, the concert circuit had quietly moved on without him. So Gerald Whitfield did what ambitious men do when the spotlight fades. He built his own stage. 12 years ago, he founded the Whitfield Summer Intensive, a 3-week program in Philadelphia for advanced piano students. He designed the curriculum. He selected the faculty. He chose who got in and who didn't. And most importantly, he decided which students would receive his personal recommendation to partnering conservatories. Curtis, Peabody, Eastman, Juilliard. One letter from Whitfield could open a door that took other students years of auditions to reach. One bad word from him could close it permanently. Everyone in the Philadelphia music world knew this. No one challenged it. He ran the program like a private court. 2 young assistants, both former students, both loyal to the point of silence, followed him everywhere. They carried his water, adjusted his music stand, nodded at every remark he made. When Whitfield spoke, they listened. When he laughed, they laughed. When he frowned at a student's performance, they wrote it down. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. His power wasn't in volume. It was in access. He controlled the gateway, and everyone in that room knew it. But there was a pattern. 12 years of the Whitfield Summer Intensive, hundreds of students trained, dozens of recommendation letters written, and yet, if you pulled the records, which no one had, until recently, you would find something difficult to explain. The number of black students who received Whitfield's personal recommendation to a conservatory was 0. Not low, not disproportionate. 0. It wasn't written in any policy. It wasn't spoken out loud. Whitfield was far too careful for that. His method was clean, professional, almost invisible. He used the language of craft. Your technique lacks the discipline this program requires. You play with too much raw emotion and not enough structural awareness. I'm not sure you have the foundation for conservatory-level study. The words sounded like feedback. They functioned like a gate. 3 years ago, a young black woman named Amara Collins enrolled in the program. She was 19, self-funded, and had been playing since she was 6. Whitfield eliminated her after the first week. The reason on the evaluation form read, "Insufficient technical discipline." Amara applied to Berklee College of Music on her own the following fall. She was accepted with a merit scholarship. She's now in her 2nd year, performing in showcases and earning straight A's. Her story never made it back to Whitfield, but it made it to other people, quietly, through emails and phone calls and anonymous forms submitted to the program's oversight board. 5 years of complaints, all anonymous, all describing the same pattern, none with enough hard evidence to act on. Until now, the oversight board made a decision. They invited an independent evaluator to observe the program from the inside, someone with enough authority that Whitfield couldn't dismiss the findings, someone whose name carried more weight than his. They invited Harriet Dawson. She arrived on the first day without introduction. A woman in her late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a dark cardigan and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat in the last row of the rehearsal hall, a notebook open on her lap, a pen in her hand. No one knew who she was. Whitfield didn't notice her. His assistants didn't check her name. She was just another face in the back of the room. But Harriet Dawson noticed everything. She noticed the way Whitfield stood while 60 students sat. She noticed the way his eyes moved across the room and stopped, just for a second longer, on the young black man in the last row, with the worn backpack and the quiet face. She noticed the way Whitfield leaned toward his assistant and murmured something. The assistant checked a clipboard. "Byron Palmer, full pay registration, sir." Whitfield raised one eyebrow, looked at Byron again, then looked away. Byron didn't see it. He was staring at the Steinway at the front of the room. Harriet wrote something in her notebook, underlined it twice. The morning had barely begun, and she had already seen enough to keep watching. Whitfield began the session the way he always did. He asked each student to stand, state their name, and describe their musical background. The first student rose. Blonde hair, pressed blazer, confident posture. "Olivia Chambers. I've been studying under Professor Reinhardt at the Manhattan School of Music Preparatory Division for 6 years. I competed in the International Young Pianists Competition in Vienna last spring." Whitfield nodded. "Excellent." The next. A tall boy with glasses. "Nathan Cross. Private lessons since age 5. My teacher is a former student of yours, actually. I've performed at 3 regional competitions." Another nod. "Very good." One by one they stood. They all had the same polish. Private instructors, concert experience, parents who could afford summer programs without blinking. Whitfield smiled at each of them, welcomed them, called a few by their family names as if he already knew them. Then it was Byron's turn. He stood slowly. His chair scraped the floor. A few heads turned. "Byron Palmer." His voice was low but steady. "South Philadelphia. Self-taught." The room went quiet. Not the respectful quiet that had followed the other introductions, a different kind, the kind that carries a question mark. Whitfield tilted his head. The corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Self-taught," he repeated, as if tasting the words. "On what instrument?" "Piano, sir." Somewhere in the middle rows, someone exhaled a short laugh. Whitfield didn't stop it. He let it hang in the air like permission. He walked toward Byron, slowly, deliberately, the way a man walks when he already knows what he's about to do. "What's this smell?" The words landed like a slap. Students in the nearby seats shifted uncomfortably. Byron said nothing. "You crawled out of a sewer. You're stinking up my classroom." Whitfield was close now, close enough to whisper, but he didn't whisper. He said it at full volume so every student in every row could hear. He grabbed Byron's hand, lifted it, turned it over, examining it the way someone examines a stain. Then he dropped it, pulled a tissue from his vest pocket, wiped each finger one by one, slowly, deliberately, as if he'd touched something contaminated. "Disgusting. You'd soil my Steinway just breathing near it." The room was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. A girl in the front row looked down at her hands. A boy 2 seats over stared at the floor. They all knew this was wrong. None of them said a word. Byron's jaw tightened. His hands hung at his sides. But he didn't drop his eyes. "I can play, sir." Whitfield blinked. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe. Or irritation. The expression disappeared as fast as it came. He turned to the class, spread his arms slightly like a showman. "Did everyone hear that?" His voice was bright now, theatrical. "Mr. Palmer says he can play." Laughter. Nervous, scattered, but real. A few students looked at each other. Some laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they didn't know what else to do. "Go home, boy. You don't belong here." Byron didn't move. His shoulders were still. His breathing was even. He stood like a man who had already decided. The laughter faded. The room shifted again. Something had changed. The air, the tension, the weight of the silence. "I told you to leave." "No, sir. I can play." 5 words. Quiet. Not angry, not pleading, just certain. Whitfield's jaw locked. His nostrils flared. The showman vanished. What was left was something older and colder. He seized Byron by the collar, hard enough to jerk his body forward, and dragged him across the room toward the Steinway grand piano at the front. Students gasped. One girl covered her mouth. Whitfield shoved Byron onto the bench with enough force that the piano lid trembled. His phone came out. Camera open. Hit record. He set it on the music stand, lens aimed directly at Byron's face. "You want to play? Show us. Show us. You'll be our laughing stock." 60 students stared. 60 pairs of eyes, some wide, some narrow, some wet. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. In the back row, Harriet Dawson had stopped writing. Her pen rested on the notebook. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. She had watched the entire thing without moving, without blinking. Her hand was steady, but her knuckles were white around the pen. She had come here looking for evidence of a pattern. She had just watched it happen in real time. And now, like everyone else in that room, she waited. Byron sat on the bench. His hands rested on his thighs. The Steinway stretched out in front of him. 88 keys, black and white, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked down at them, and the room held its breath. Every voice in Byron's head told him to stand up and walk out. "You don't belong here. They're right. You're a grocery clerk who plays a broken piano in a one-bedroom apartment. These people have been training since before you could spell your own name. Walk away. Save yourself the humiliation. Save whatever dignity you have left." His hands were trembling. He could feel the sweat on his palms, cold against his thighs. The fluorescent lights above him hummed. 60 people sat behind him, waiting for the joke to begin. Whitfield's phone was recording. The camera was aimed at the back of his head. He could hear breathing, someone shifting in a seat, a nervous cough, the faint click of Whitfield's shoe on the hardwood floor as the man repositioned himself, arms crossed, smile locked in place. Byron looked down at his hands. They were rough, scarred. The skin cracked along the knuckles. These were hands that had lifted crates at 5 in the morning and stacked canned goods until his shoulders burned. Hands that smelled like cardboard and floor cleaner at the end of a shift. But they were also the hands that had played every single night for 8 years. The hands that had memorized Chopin in a room with no air conditioning. The hands that had traced his mother's handwritten notes until the ink had faded and the pages had gone soft. His mother's voice came to him then. Not loud, not dramatic, just there, the way it always was. Somewhere between memory and instinct. "Music doesn't care where you come from, baby. It only cares that you show up." And behind it, another voice. Deeper, steadier. Loretta, standing at the kitchen table with the flyer smoothed flat under her palm. "Your mama didn't leave that piano so it could collect dust." Byron closed his eyes, drew a long, slow breath, held it. When he opened them, something had changed. His back straightened, his shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He lifted his hands from his thighs and placed them over the keys. 10 fingers hovered above the ivory. Not touching. Not yet. Suspended in the space between silence and sound. The room behind him went absolutely still. Not the nervous quiet from before. Something deeper, something involuntary. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people forgets to breathe. Whitfield watched from the side, arms folded. the smile still clinging to the edge of his mouth, the camera still recording. 3 seconds passed. Each one felt like a year. Then Byron's left pinky came down on a single key, and the Steinway answered him back. The note hung in the air like a question. A single tone. G below middle C. It came out thin, almost fragile. The sound of a hand that wasn't sure it had permission to be there. It wobbled at the edges, not quite steady, not quite full. If you weren't listening carefully, you might have mistaken it for a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. The pitch was perfect. The tone was clean, and the way Byron held it, not too long, not too short, just enough for the sound to bloom inside the body of the Steinway. That was not the touch of someone guessing. That was instinct. A few students glanced at each other. One raised an eyebrow. Whitfield didn't move. His arms stayed crossed. The smile stayed in place. One note meant nothing. Anyone could press a key. He glanced at his phone on the music stand. Still recording. Good. He wanted this on camera. He wanted proof that the boy from South Philly was wasting everyone's time. But in the last row, Harriet Dawson leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. She had heard thousands of students play their first note on a concert-grade piano. Most of them pressed too hard, overcompensating for nerves. Some pressed too soft, afraid of the sound. This boy had done neither. He had let the piano speak first, and then he'd listened. She picked up her pen. Byron played a second note. Then a third. Slow, careful. Each one placed with the kind of attention you give to steps in the dark, when you can't see the ground but you know it's there. The notes came one at a time, separated by silence, as if he was building something fragile and didn't want to rush it. A girl in the second row whispered to the student beside her, "Is he actually going to play something?" And then, without warning, the fragments connected. Chopin. Ballade number 1 in G minor. It began in the lower register, a slow, mournful phrase that uncoiled like smoke from a candle. The melody rose gently, note by note, the left hand laying a foundation while the right hand floated above it, delicate and precise. The opening bars were tentative, as if Byron was asking the piano whether it would trust him. And the piano, note by note, said yes. The room changed. You could feel it in the way people sat. Spines straightening, phones lowering. The smirk on one student's face dissolving into something that looked like confusion, and then, slowly, like wonder. This was not a beginner fumbling through a piece he'd heard on YouTube. This was Chopin played with understanding. The kind of understanding that comes not from a textbook, but from years of sitting alone in a room with the music, listening to what it's trying to say. The ballade moved into its second theme, a lyrical passage in E-flat major, tender and warm, the kind of melody that makes you think of a voice singing in another room. Byron played it softly, leaning into each phrase, his wrists rising and falling with the contour of the line. The sound was intimate, personal, like a conversation between two people who have known each other for a very long time. Byron's hands moved faster now. The ballad demanded it. The middle section surged forward, arpeggios cascading down the keyboard, both hands crossing, separating, reuniting. His fingers were not textbook. A classical instructor would have corrected his thumb position, widened his wrist angle, adjusted the curve of his fourth finger. His technique was rough in places, self-taught in every sense of the word. But the music didn't care. Because what Byron lacked in formal training, he made up for in something that couldn't be taught. He breathed with the melody. When the phrase rose, his body leaned in. When it fell, he pulled back. He didn't play the notes. He lived inside them, moving through the music the way water moves through a riverbed, finding the path by feel. Whitfield's smile was gone. not fading. Gone. His arms had uncrossed without him noticing. His right hand hung at his side, fingers slightly curled, the way a pianist's hand curls when it hears something it recognizes. He was a Juilliard graduate. He had performed this piece himself, at 24, on a stage in front of 300 people. He knew exactly how difficult the ballade was. He knew the precision it demanded, the emotional range, the sheer physical endurance of the final movement. And this boy, this self-taught 18-year-old boy from South Philadelphia, was playing it. Not perfectly, but with something that perfection alone could never produce. The ballad climbed toward its climax. Byron's left hand thundered in the bass, while his right hand sang in the treble. The dynamic swelled, pressing against the walls. Students who had been sitting politely were now gripping the edges of their seats. A boy in the fourth row had forgotten his mouth was open. The girl beside him gripped her armrest. One girl had tears on her cheeks and didn't seem to know it. Then something happened that no one expected. The ballade reached its peak, the moment where Chopin's composition drives toward its dramatic final resolution. And Byron didn't play it. He didn't play the ending. Instead, his hands shifted. The key changed, the tempo softened, and a new melody emerged from inside the old one. The way a river branches into a different stream. It was simpler than Chopin. Quieter. The notes came slower, spaced further apart, carried on a rhythm that felt like breathing. There were no fireworks, no cascading runs, no thundering bass. Just a melody, clean, aching, deeply human, that seemed to come from somewhere far away. This was not Chopin. This was Vivian Palmer, the song she had written in her notebook with a pencil that needed sharpening. The song she had played for Byron every night before bed, humming the melody when her fingers got tired. The song that had no title, no recording, no published sheet music. It existed only in a small handwritten notebook with faded ink and soft pages. The notebook that was sitting right now in the worn backpack on the floor beside the last row, where Byron had been sitting before Whitfield dragged him away. Byron's eyes were closed. His lips were pressed together, not in tension but in concentration. The kind of concentration that comes from holding something precious and not wanting to let go. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them. He didn't open his eyes. His hands didn't falter, didn't shake. For the first time in 8 years, he was playing his mother's music in front of other people. For the first time, the melody that had lived inside a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a row house in South Philadelphia was being heard by someone other than the walls. The music told a story without words. It was the story of a woman who dreamed of playing on the world's great stages and was told, quietly, politely, that those stages were not for her. A woman who took 2 buses and a train to an audition and was sent home with a letter that said, nothing. A woman who came home and played anyway. A woman who put her hands over her son's hands and showed him that the weight of a note is not in the finger, it's in the heart. A girl in the front row pressed both hands over her mouth. A boy in the 3rd row looked at the ceiling, blinking fast. One of Whitfield's assistants had turned away from the piano entirely, facing the wall, shoulders tight. The other stood frozen, a clipboard pressed against his chest, forgotten. Harriet Dawson had stopped writing long ago. Her pen lay flat on the notebook. Her glasses were fogged. She didn't remove them. She sat perfectly still, the way a person sits when they are afraid that any movement will break something sacred. She had spent 40 years in music education. She had heard prodigies at 12 who could play Rachmaninoff from memory. She had heard virtuosos with flawless technique and empty hearts, and students with imperfect hands and souls wide enough to fill a concert hall. She had never heard anything quite like this. Byron's melody began to climb. The Chopin returned, not as a separate piece but woven into his mother's song. the two melodies intertwining, answering each other, arguing and harmonizing at the same time. Classical structure met something raw and unpolished and deeply personal. Discipline held hands with grief. Precision danced with longing. The music built. It rose. It filled the room like light filling a dark space, reaching into corners, pushing against walls. Byron's hands moved with a certainty that hadn't been there 3 minutes ago. His body swayed. His feet found the pedals, the sustain, the soft, and used them the way his mother had shown him, not by rule but by ear. The final passage came. Both hands driving toward a single chord, every finger engaged, the full weight of his arms behind it. The chord hit like a wave crashing against stone, enormous, resonant, filling the room from floor to ceiling. The Steinway vibrated. The air shook. Then it began to fade, slowly. The harmonics decaying, the overtones thinning, the sound pulling away like a tide retreating from the shore. One note remained, then half a note, then a whisper, then nothing. Silence, not a sound, not a breath, not a movement. 3 seconds of absolute, unbroken stillness. The room had become a single held breath, 60 people suspended in the space between the last note and whatever came next. Then, from the back of the room, a single pair of hands came together. Harriet Dawson. One clap, then another, steady, deliberate. Not applause born from politeness, applause born from recognition. The sound of someone who knew exactly what she had just witnessed. A second pair of hands joined, then a third, then 10, then 20. Chairs scraped as people stood, one row, then the next, then every row at once. The applause was not measured, not the kind you give at the end of a student recital because the program says to. It was the kind that comes from the chest. The kind that shakes your hands and stings your palms and makes your throat tight and your eyes burn. 60 people, standing, clapping. Some of them crying openly now, not hiding it, not wiping it away. Byron sat at the piano, hands still resting on the keys, eyes still closed, tears still wet on his face. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The Steinway had said everything. The applause didn't stop. It rolled through the room in waves, rising, falling, rising again. Students clapped until their palms burned. Some of them were standing on the balls of their feet, as if the music had pulled them upward and they hadn't come back down yet. A girl in the second row was crying openly, both hands pressed flat against her chest. In the back rows, 2 students embraced, strangers until 10 minutes ago. And in the middle rows, where the laughter had come from earlier, something different was happening. The students who had smirked when Byron said self-taught were now clapping harder than anyone, not because they wanted to be seen clapping, because they were ashamed they had ever laughed. One boy stared at the floor between claps. A girl wiped her eyes and looked away. Nora Bennett, front row, tall, dark-haired, stood up and walked to the piano. She extended her hand. Byron opened his eyes, looked at her hand, then at her face. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in this room. Byron took her hand. His grip was light. His fingers were still trembling. He nodded once. No words. Behind them, Gerald Whitfield had not moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing when Byron played the first note. His arms hung at his sides. His phone was still recording on the music stand. But the camera had been pointed at the wrong person this entire time. It had captured the wrong story. Whitfield's face had gone through several stages in the last 3 minutes. The smile had disappeared first, then the composure, then the certainty. What was left was something he hadn't worn in 12 years. The expression of a man who had been wrong, publicly, irreversibly, in front of the only audience that mattered. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes moved, from the standing students to Byron to the phone and back again, searching for something to hold on to, a rebuttal, an explanation, a way to take back what had just happened. There was nothing. Then a voice cut through the applause. "Excuse me!" It came from the back row. Calm, clear. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume to command attention. Harriet Dawson stood up. She removed her reading glasses and let them hang from the chain around her neck. She closed her notebook, and she walked, slowly, steadily, toward the front of the room. The applause faded. Students turned. Whitfield turned. She stopped 3 feet from the piano, looked at Byron first. "Young man, what is your name?" Byron's voice was hoarse. "Byron Palmer, ma'am." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. A small, deliberate nod. The kind a teacher gives when a student has exceeded every expectation she didn't know she had. Then she turned to the room. "My name is Harriet Dawson. I am the chair of piano studies at the Curtis Institute of Music." She paused. Let the name register. "I was invited here to evaluate this program." The silence that followed was electric. Students looked at each other with wide eyes. One of Whitfield's assistants took a step backward. The other set down his clipboard and didn't pick it up again. Whitfield's face drained of whatever color it had left. Harriet turned to him. Her voice didn't change. Her expression didn't harden. She simply looked at him the way you look at a document that has already been read, filed, and sealed. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I've seen enough." She let the words settle. The room was so still you could hear the air conditioning click off. Then she added, still looking directly at him, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in music. 12 years you've run this program. And in 3 minutes, that young man taught this room more about music than you have in a decade. Whitfield opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in 12 years, Gerald Whitfield had absolutely nothing to say. The board met 4 days later. Harriet Dawson presented 3 things. First, the video. Whitfield's own video, the one he had recorded on his phone, the one meant to document Byron's failure. The insults, the tissue, the collar grab, the drag across the room. And then 3 minutes of music that made the person holding the camera go silent. Second, the records. 12 years of student evaluations, hundreds of recommendations, and a single undeniable number. 0 black students recommended to conservatories in over a decade. Third, the complaints. 5 years of anonymous reports, all describing the same behavior, different students, different years, same outcome. Same quiet disappearance from the program. None with enough evidence to act on. Until Whitfield pressed record himself. The board deliberated for less than 2 hours. Gerald Whitfield was removed from his position as director of the program he had founded 12 years earlier. His name was stripped from the branding. The Whitfield Summer Intensive would be renamed. His access to the building was terminated the same afternoon. The Philadelphia Orchestra, where Whitfield had held a guest performance contract for 9 years, declined to renew. No further comment. The investigation widened. Former students began to come forward, not anonymously this time. Their names were attached to their stories. Among them was Amara Collins, the young woman who had been eliminated 3 years earlier for insufficient technical discipline. She was now in her 2nd year at Berkeley, performing in showcases. Her statement was 1 sentence long. "I always knew it wasn't about my technique." Whitfield simply lost what he had built. The stage, the power, the gatekeeping authority he had used for 12 years to decide whose talent was real and whose wasn't. He had used his position to keep people out. Now the position was gone. The punishment fit precisely. You use power to crush people, you lose that power. Byron found out about the scholarship 3 days after the performance. Harriet Dawson called him personally. He was in the cereal aisle at Dave's grocery, halfway through his morning shift, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Palmer, this is Harriet Dawson. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to the Curtis Institute of Music. Tuition, housing, and a living stipend. You would begin this fall." Byron didn't speak for 6 seconds. The phone shook against his ear. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in 40 years of teaching." He set the box in his hand on the nearest shelf, walked to the back of the store, leaned against the wall beside the loading dock, and cried. The video went public 2 days later. A student in the third row had recorded the entire performance on her phone, from the moment Whitfield dragged Byron to the bench to the final standing ovation. She posted it without commentary, just the footage, the music. It reached 500,000 views in 24 hours. By the end of the week, it had passed 4 million. The comments section filled with thousands of stories. People who had been told they didn't belong. People who had been judged before they opened their mouths. People who had talent no one ever bothered to look for. That evening, Byron stood in the hallway outside the rehearsal room and called Loretta. She picked up on the second ring. "Baby?" "Grandma." His voice cracked. "I got in. Full ride. Curtis." Silence on the other end. A long silence. Then a sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. The sound a person makes when something they have been praying for finally arrives. "Your mama's smiling right now, baby. She's smiling." 2 months later, Byron stood outside the Curtis Institute of Music for the first time as a student. His old backpack was on his shoulder. His mother's notebook was in his hand. In the front pocket of the bag, folded and creased from being carried too long, was the Whitfield Summer Intensive flyer, the one Loretta had found in his jeans. He looked up at the building. Limestone walls, tall windows, a door that his mother had once walked through for an audition, and never walked through again. Before he left Philadelphia for the last time that summer, Harriet Dawson had told him something he would carry for the rest of his life. "Your mother applied here once. She would have been extraordinary." She paused. "And so will you." That fall, Byron Palmer sat down at a Steinway grand piano in a practice room on the second floor of the Curtis Institute, opened his mother's notebook to the first page, and began to play. Back in South Philadelphia, Loretta placed a new photograph on the lid of the old Wurlitzer. It showed Byron sitting at a grand piano, eyes closed, fingers on the keys, the moment before the first note. She looked at it every morning, and every morning she smiled. Byron Palmer's story is not about revenge. It's not about proving Gerald Whitfield wrong. That was a consequence, not a purpose. The purpose was simpler, older, harder to kill. It was about a pair of hands. Hands that had been grabbed, dropped, and wiped off with a tissue. Hands that had been called filthy and told they would never belong on the keys of a Steinway piano. Those same hands sat down on a bench they were dragged to, touched a piano they were told they'd ruin, and played music that silenced a room full of people who had already decided they knew the ending. They didn't know the ending. Nobody did. Because talent doesn't send a warning. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't arrive in the packaging you expect. The right school, the right teacher, the right skin. It shows up in scarred hands that smell like floor cleaner and 8 years of playing alone in a room where nobody listened. Until someone listened. And everything changed. Vivian Palmer never got to play on the stage her son played on. She never got the letter that said yes. She never heard the applause, never felt the standing ovation, never watched her boy walk through the doors of Curtis. But she gave him something no program, no scholarship, no institution could ever provide. She gave him the music. And she gave him the words he carried every time he sat down at the keys. Music doesn't care where you come from, baby. It only cares that you show up. Byron showed up. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not connections, not money, not the right last name, just showing up. With everything you have, in front of people who expect you to have nothing, and letting your hands speak, the way Byron did. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit down, place your fingers on the keys, and play. If this story hit you somewhere real, drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked, where you came from, or what people assumed about you? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose hands are waiting for a chance to play. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Because next week, we've got one that involves a courtroom, a janitor, and 3 words that changed everything. I'll see you there.
And that's the thing nobody tells you about talent. It doesn't wait for the right school. It doesn't wait for the right teacher. It doesn't wait for permission. It grows wherever it's planted. Even in the dark, even in silence, even when nobody is watching. You can ignore it. You can mock it. You can try to humiliate the person carrying it. But you cannot kill it. Because real talent isn't something you learn. It is something you are. And the people who try to decide who is worthy before they even listen, they are not protecting standards. They are protecting themselves. Because nothing terrifies a gatekeeper more than someone who doesn't need the gate. But here the one stays with me. The things we inherit from the people who love us never disappear. A voice, a lesson, a song nobody else has heard. You carry it in silence, sometimes for years, and then one day you sit down, you open the hands or your heart, and it all comes out. And the room goes quiet, because truth sounds different from everything else. So tell me, what does someone you love teach you that the world hasn't seen yet? Drop it in the comments. If this one hit you, share it, like it, subscribe so you're here for the next one. Because it doesn't matter where you come from, it only matters that you show up.